You just got your financial statement in the mail and it says that you made 10%, but did you really? Let's talk about the silent threat of inflation. My name is Connor Mackey and I'm a financial advisor for Strategic Financial Group. There's this common saying that a dollar today doesn't go as far as it used to, right? Sort of a common sense statement that we throw out. Maybe you have recollections of a candy bar costing 5 cents or paying for your gas tank to fill it up for $10, right? We know that that's not the case anymore, but it would be helpful to put some meat on the bones of this statement that a dollar does not go as far as it used to. I want you to imagine that it's 1996 again. The movie Titanic was just released. Bill Clinton was elected for his second term. I was just born and you're living on $100,000. Congratulations. In 1996, $100,000, depending on where you live, is a very comfortable living. That same $100,000 budget, after 29 years of inflation, bringing us to 2025, would require $205,583.81 to make that same budget. In 29 years, the US dollar was inflated by 105.6%. We've talked about in a previous video, maybe you've aimed for that $1 million mark and that perhaps you've made it at this point. You've saved up, you've scraped together for years to save up this money to make it to that $1 million mark. But the question is, will that money stretch as far as you think it will, as far as it used to in the past? After all, you may retire, but inflation never does. In fact, a little bit of inflation is considered a good thing because it encourages people to spend their money, right? It encourages them to buy things while the prices are lower because they know that in the future it's going to cost more. People spend money when inflation is going up, and it usually leads to economies spending more or growing more. In fact, the opposite, deflation, has the opposite effect. It encourages people not to spend their money, encourages them to wait a little bit because they think the price will be lower later on, and it probably will be. And as a result, economies slow down. People lose jobs, wages go down. Deflation is actually a really bad thing. Too low of an inflation rate also means that the Federal Reserve has less room to play with when it comes to interest rates to help the economy. And so for that reason, the Federal Reserve aims for an inflation rate of about 2%. But the past couple of years, you may have noticed, it seems like inflation has been significantly higher than what we've experienced in the past. And this is very true. Remember 2020? Nothing interesting happened in 2020, right? Well, one thing that was interesting is that the inflation rate averaged out to be about 1.2%. In 2021, we saw it spike to 4.7%. In 2022, and it was an intense hike to 8%. And in 2023, it was 4.1. 2024 averaged out to be 2.9. The point is, we've experienced a sort of tremendous whiplash of inflation in recent years. And by the way, in case you're wondering, in 1917, the inflation rate was 17.8%. So if you think that we've had it bad, think again. Things have been far worse for our country in the past. You may remember the early 80s, inflation was high then as well. But the point is, right, this means that to live the same life you're living in 2020, let's say you had a budget of $100,000, to live that same lifestyle, you would need $124,631.87 today to live on that budget of $100,000 in 2020. Most people would be satisfied with being done looking at inflation there, knowing that they have to raise their budget a little bit. But there's a vital point in inflation that we cannot miss. It doesn't just affect your spending, it affects your returns as well. Let's look at 2020. Let's say you had $100,000 invested in the S&P in 2020 on January 1st. By December 31st, your $100,000 would have grown by 16.26%. Not bad at all. A 16% return in a year is pretty good. It would leave you at the end of the year with an investment of $116,260. If you made 16 grand in a year through passive investing, I imagine you'd be pretty happy about it, right? However, we have to remember inflation. While you made $16,000, that $16,000 is not adjusted for inflation. So you got to adjust for inflation. Here's the equation if you're a math geek and you want to know how we do this. So you're going to take your rate of return, that's 16%, add 1 to it, divide that by the inflation rate plus 1, and then subtract 1 from the number that you get. That's the equation. Did you write it down? Probably not. It's not important. Let me give you the answer. In 2020, a 16.26% return adjusted by our 8% inflation would mean that your real rate of return is 7.6%, meaning your $116,000 that you had in December of 2020 would actually be equivalent to $107,600 in January of 2020. This is all very complicated. And I'm using an extreme example of an extreme year to make a point, because you may think you made 16% in a year, and technically you did. And your advisor is going to tell you, look, we made you 16%. But in reality, you did not make 16% when you look at your real rate of return. Those dollars are not worth what they used to be. When you're in your accumulation years, this doesn't matter as much. We don't want to face large inflation. We, again, want to keep it at that 2% mark. But a little inflation is a good thing. It encourages the economy to move forward. However, as you approach retirement and you're starting to become more conservative in your portfolio, inflation can take a serious hit on your funds. Imagine your entire portfolio in 2020 made 9%. Most years, 9% for a conservative portfolio, that's a good year. But in 2020, with that 8% inflation rate, your real rate of return was less than 1%. That's a bad year. Now, tack on the idea that you might be taking money out of your portfolio, and suddenly 1% is not at all sufficient to restock what you took out in 2020. Inflation is sort of a silent killer some years. It can be good for the economy, but can also be damaging to your investments more than you may think. And that is why it's so important to have a balance of diversification in your funds. For a lot of our clients, not all of them, but for a lot of them, it makes sense to be a little more aggressive in their Roth accounts because it's going to be tax deferred. They're not going to be paying taxes on it. They already paid the taxes on it when they put the money into the account. And for more conservative portions of their retirement funds, we'll put those in the traditional IRA. Or maybe we take a mixture of conservative and aggressive portions and we put that all into their IRA. Every situation is different, right? But we do this because we want to buy time to take risk. We use the more conservative funds to afford their lifestyle while allowing the more aggressive funds more time to grow. That way we're not selling stocks at a loss, or we're not selling the portions of their portfolio that are outpacing inflation. Whether prices are rising or falling, your retirement plan needs to be flexible, but also intentional and built to weather the unexpected. You wouldn't go out into the ocean fishing without looking at the weather first, right? So why do we do that with our one retirement? If you're interested in working with a financial advisor or you have questions or concerns, feel free to reach out at strategicfg.net. Again, my name is Connor Mackey with Strategic Financial Group.